After doing a little song and a little dance, the next thing you Navy guys should do when you get off the boat in a big city like New York is to check out their meal options. A little song, a little dance. Batman's head on a lance. And we all know that Manhattan has probably a billion choices of things to eat. From street dogs to pizza to fast food to gourmet, and probably an ultra gourmet meal that would cost you more than an aircraft carrier costs the American Defense Department. New York City has it all. It is a wonderful town. But forget about food for a minute, although I don't think I'm going to because my stomach is growling, so forgive that off the top. I ate lunch 2.5 hours ago. Don't know why I'm hungry now. Anyway, you need something nice to wash that grub down. So let's talk about things you can drink. Well, New Yorkers and their fellow Americans can import a beverage from another country that they're going to love, and that's Sparkplug Coffee. Sparkplug serves customers in Canada. Canada. I say it that way, so I'll hit the right notes. But a few years ago, they expanded their operation and let Americans in on this too. And here's a fun bonus for my fellow citizens north of the border. We Canadians don't have to pay for the shipping costs. Oh, and take note that people in Canada or the US will have those deliveries within a week. And by the way, if it sounds a little bit different the last few seconds, it's because I paused to put up some sound barriers I forgot to do. A little bit out of it here on a Sunday afternoon. And what will be in that bag? Why, it's the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that anyone in Canada has to offer. Do you like a wide assortment of blends and roasts? Well, Sparkplug's got 'em. They've even got a choice of rotating seasonal blends. You don't even have to keep downing the brew you downed last August or November. It's May. Spring it up. Or keep drinking that November stuff. It's your life. Do what works for you. You can get half-calf, or decaf, by the way. But whatever caffeine content you desire, we suggest you start a membership in the Autopilot Coffee Club. You can pause, or even flat out cancel anytime. But stick with it and you'll enjoy perks and deals. You'll also save money every time you order something. Yes, Sparkplug lets you customize to get your orders when it suits your sipping needs. No naval officers, this is not a restrictive or robotic Coffee of the Month Club. Coffee of the Month Club. Where you need to go online is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. You will get a one-time 20% savings by using our HYES promo code. Buy some coffee products, save some greenbacks. All right then, you tourists, it's time to actually start reviewing this Singin' In Frank Dance Fest. So let's not waste any more time in saying action. Have you ever seen On the Town? Hello, New Yorkers, and everyone else for that matter, and thank you ever so much for making the 589th episode, 589, of Have You Ever Seen, a fairly brief part of your 24 hours, your 24-hour leave, or maybe you're spreading this podcast out over a few days, listening here, listening there. In any case, thank you for being with me. The purpose of this podcast is to look back at classic films and to spoil them, I said, spoil, every single Monday. On Fridays, I, or Ryan Ellis, talk about those classics alone, no partner. Since this is a Monday, normally my wife Bev would be here and she'd pipe up right now, but she continues to recover from the heel surgery she had in early April. She's almost ready to start recording again. In fact, I've got news about that later on in the podcast. She's going to come back next week. Anyway, she's recovering pretty nicely and she can go up and down the stairs. That's the biggest thing. She was bedridden at first and now she's able to get around. Anyway, she'll be back on the 20th, Monday, May 20th. We cover another Hitchcock film. Now, since I have the sole honor of itemizing the goods and the not-so-goods in On the Town, on the town, on the town, on the town, I will allow myself the indulgence of going on whatever tangents I feel like. In these solo shows, I sometimes, often, sidebar away from what is otherwise a straightforward plot breakdown to ask reasonably good questions. Just reasonably. Not really all that good. And if you listen to me yap on my own with any regularity, you know I have to use this word right around now, tomfoolery. And we'll do all that plot breakdowning and that tangenting in a few minutes. But first, let's discuss the nuts and bolts of this film and the honors that have been bestowed upon it. So, MGM released On the Town going on 75 years ago, at the very end of the year in 1949. The premiere was in early December, but this extravaganza was not released to audiences until December 30th. And it did well. The numbers has it 10th at the box office for movies that came out in that final year of the 40s, although Wikipedia doesn't have it in the top 10. Wikipedia does say it more than doubled its budget, so that's pretty good. However much it actually made, MGM didn't give their production the kind of budget they normally did for musicals, and they didn't give Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen a long shooting schedule either. They co-directed this movie. MGM didn't have a lot of faith in it, so to be acclaimed as this has remained all these years later tells you they beat the odds. This film does very well in the Rotten Tomatoes world. The critics are at 93 positive, while the audiences are at 83%. There are only 30 reviews on the site, and their average is a very nice 8 out of 10. Only 2 of those critics gave it a bad review, by the way, just 2 of them. As good as those numbers are, a lot of Gene Kelly's other musicals, like Singin In The Rain, Singin In The Rain, and American in Paris, and Summer Stock, did even better. Singin' and Summer are actually flawless with the reviewers, 100% for each of them on Rotten Tomatoes. The National Film Registry inducted this motion picture into the Library of Congress in 2018, along with 8 other movies we've reviewed at one time or another. Broadcast News, Brokeback Mountain, dun, 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 dun. Hood, Jurassic Park, My Fair Lady, The Navigator, Pickup on South Street, and The Shining. The Navigator, in fact, went up on this channel 4 months and 1 day ago. On the Town won an Oscar, which was for Best Scoring of a Musical Picture. Roger, I guess it's Edens, E-D-E-N-S, Edens, or Edens, probably Edens, and Lenny Hayton shared that honor. Hayton won again in 1969 for the Hello Dolly score, which he shared with Lionel Newman. Gene Kelly directed that too. Lenny Hayton's best known for on the IMDb is, fittingly, Singin' In The Rain, which I think is the greatest movie musical ever made. That and Wizard of Oz are far ahead of anything else in the genre. For me, they're 1 and 1A, but I guess I like Singin' In The Rain even more because it's so funny. Now, while the Leinster was impressive, Edens seriously went up to him during this time frame of the late 40s and early 50s. And I say that because he won 3 Oscars in a row. It was the Easter Parade score with Johnny Green in 1948, then it was this with Hayton, then it was Annie Get Your Gun with another different co-composer in 1950, that's Adolf Deutsch. I should also note that Leonard Bernstein wrote the tunes for the Broadway show, but they didn't use all of his songs in this movie, and they wrote quite a few new ones. The Betty Comden and Adolph Green screenplay won the Writers Guild Award for Best Written American Musical, but their script was not up for the Oscar. They also wrote the stage musical before adapting it into a screenplay, Stanley, so they based this on their own stuff. Comden and Green wrote a lot of scripts together back in these post-war days, although their only 2 Oscar nominations came in the mid-50s for The Bandwagon and It's Always Fair Weather. Nope, nothing for Singin' In The Rain. Not for the screenplay, anyway. The American Film Institute, did I get that one? The American Film Institute, was kind to this movie. The classic, New York, New York, it's a wonderful town. That tune is 41st on the Top 100 Songs, and the film itself is 19th on AFI's Top 25 Musicals. Oh, there's noise outside. Bev watched this movie with me, and I'm going to incorporate things she said fairly often during this episode, but the first thing I'll tell you that we talked about afterwards is that it's curious that there are 2 such famous songs that have the same title. New York, and New York, New York, because the more famous one, New York, New York, that's used in many movies, including the end of Lost in America, which Bev and I watched again just a few days ago, coincidentally. That's also, of course, the movie New York, New York that De Niro made with Scorsese, and Liza Minnelli's in that too. And how about this? Frank Sinatra was involved in both songs. So the song in this movie is 41st on AFI's list, but the better known one that he and Liza Minnelli are known to sing is 31st on AFI's list. Bev said that she thinks the song from this movie is always really going to be known as Springfield, Springfield, because The Simpsons did one of their classic parodies in the episode where Bart joins the junior campers. The few, the proud, the geeky. But enough about the setup, it's time to talk about the story. Gene Kelly is billed first in the opening titles, then it's Frank Sinatra, Betty Garrett, and Ann Miller. Those jaunty credits play out, then we find ourselves down on the docks in Brooklyn. A beefy shipyard worker sings, I feel like I'm not out of bed yet, as he strolls to work at 5:57 a.m. That song, I think, was in the original musical on stage. And then at the crack of 6, a big old Navy ship lets a bunch of excited sailors off for 24 hours worth of R&R. The men in white we'll focus on for this effort are, of course, Gene Kelly, Frank Sinatra, and Jules Munshin, who are Gaby, Chip, and Ozzy. They sing, New York, New York, it's a wonderful town, while they're seeing the sights. Censors made them change it from what it was on Broadway, by the way, which was not It's a Wonderful Town, but It's a Hell of a Town. And that's what's sung in that Simpsons episode where the song is Springfield, Springfield, it's a hell of a town. So the 3 guys zip all over the city with the song playing enthusiastically on the soundtrack. They seem to go everywhere, and this production really went to New York to shoot footage in many of the actual locations, which was not common at the time. Kelly and Donen had them filming in museums, Central Park, Rockefeller Center, and on Wall Street and Liberty Island, where the Statue of Liberty is. The On the Town production actually spent 5 solid days filming in New York, although the interior scenes were done in Hollywood. Funnily enough, the title card at the very end says the film was made in Hollywood, USA, which we laughed at because we could plainly see that at least some of the film was shot in New York City. And apparently it was hard to do that because when they were on location, Frank Sinatra was so popular that people were treating him the way they did the Beatles about 15 years later. Wherever he went, People followed and shrieked for Old Blue Eyes. Old Blue Eyes plays Chip, and he has a pamphlet which promotes all the landmarks. It's apparently still in the morning, even though they seem to have done enough things to fill 2 days already. And it's good that they move so quickly since they only have 24 hours, literally 24 hours, in New York. It's a good gag when they go down in the subway and ask for directions, but the two guys who give them pointers are drowned out by trains racing by. Since our eager guys have no idea where to go, they get on a random train and happen to see a guy sticking a poster on the wall that advertises Miss Turnstiles, Ivy Smith, which is Vera-Ellen's character. Gaby, Gene Kelly of course, has eyes full of stars when he says, "Gee, she's wonderful." I was going to rip on him here for being so smitten with a poster, but then I remembered that every once in a while I'll see a picture or a TV commercial and think the woman is so beautiful that I just can't take my eyes off of her. Second to Bev, but after her, so beautiful. I'm not even talking about Cindy Crawford and those Pepsi commercials or something like that, as good as she was, as hot as she was. There's a commercial, what's it pronounced? Rakuten? I don't know, Rakuten. So that commercial with an Indian woman at a book club, man, I think she's about as lovely as it gets. Or the actress, Sarah Catherine Hook. She used to hawk SodaStream. She was eye-poppingly cute and charming in those ads. I just don't think I'd do what Gabe does in this movie, zipping all over town trying to meet the object of my horny eyeballs' affections. Vera-Ellen is part of a fantasy sequence at this point, being glamorous and sporty and classy. She doesn't sing or even speak, but she gets to show off her talents early on in the film. The guys get off the subway with the poster in hand, and what do you know? Despite Chip saying they'll never find her in a city of however many million people, she's somehow right there in front of them on the subway platform doing a promotional thing. Well, she is Miss Turnstiles. It's not like she was promoting a coffee shop in the Bronx and happened to be down in the subway the same time they were. She's in her element down there. But still, what a coincidence. Ivy hops on the next train without knowing this sailor boy only has eyes for her. He only has eyes for her. So rather than take a train, the next one, and follow her that way, when they're already down there, the guys hustle up to street level to get to the next subway stop from there. Tourists. They end up in Betty Garrett's cab. The Betts plays Brunhilde Esterhazy, although she goes by Hildy, not Brune. And how about this? A white woman driving a cab. Now this movie has really turned into a fantasy. Of course, it was 75 years ago. Who knows what the gender and racial makeup of the driving roster of the various taxi services was back in 1949. Hildy takes an immediate shine to Chip and his white-clothed jib and flagrantly him-toos him by making it very clear she'd like to know what he feels and smells like up close. Sinatra, incidentally, had to wear padding under his costume because he was so skinny. But, well, maybe this woman just likes skeletons with nice faces and finds them attractive. Anyway, the guys just have to find Ivy, so Hildy does her level best to get them to the next station as fast as she can in New York traffic. Somehow, they just miss her walking right in front of the cab, but Gabe does realize he's got all kinds of clues about where she'll be. After all, he's got the poster. That's practically the same as having her itinerary or her journal. Hildy hangs around that stop, even though her boss somehow stumbles across her and demands she take the cab back to the stand. So she's able to give them a ride to the Museum of Anthropological History because Chip has a hunch that's where Ivy will be. I couldn't confirm if this is the same building as what's now called the Museum of Natural History, the place where Neil deGrasse Tyson works, but I think it is. Just a bit of a name change in the years since. We and the guys meet Claire, I think she pronounced it Hudson, or was it Hudson? It's spelled Huddesen. Anyway, Claire, at the museum, and she's played by Ann Miller. The first time she lays eyes on Ozzy, he's standing beside a Cro-Magnon statue and she thinks they could be twins. Unlike the enthusiastic cabbie who digs on Sinatra, this lady says that her interest in the Ozman is purely scientific. She's a cold-blooded scientist. So she takes the measurements of his head and then a picture of him, and that's all she wants. Well, at first. Claire's about to leave until he talks her up some more. Then she just up and grabs Ozzy and kisses him. Indiana Jones would not dig on the dames in this movie because he said in The Last Crusade that he doesn't like fast women. I don't mind them. I find them direct. It's refreshing that a woman will make the first move once in a while. We haven't had a song in a while, so Ann Miller takes this opportunity to warble about Prehistoric Man, which is the name of this song. Because it's a musical, all three guys and Hildy join in and they know all the right steps. This is something I've never loved about musicals, how phony it is when regular people can out of nowhere sing and dance like Broadway stars. Them being able to do that in Singin' in the Rain makes sense. They're actors and they can all sing and dance as part of their job. Well, not everybody in that movie, I guess, right? Gene Hagen can't, but anyway. Same with Hairspray. They're already on a TV show that's all about singing and dancing. Even Wizard of Oz gets a pass, for me at least, because it's such a silly fantasy. Or it's a dream by a girl who got knocked out during a twister. But in On the Town, all 6 of our main characters are professional level singers and dancers? Come on. For an anthropologist, Claire can really tap, not to mention hit the right notes in this song. It's a good number, though, that even Hildy knows perfectly. The button to this scene is when the skeleton of a big dinosaur collapses after Ozzy bumps it, causing them all to bolt. Yeah, he's to blame for this fragile structure hitting the deck, but that's all it took. He didn't rear back and kick it like he's Roy Kent. I could swear right here, but I won't. And perhaps you shouldn't let guests have the ability to get so close to your delicate antiques, Mr. Museum Runner. Put up barricades, or use stronger glue. This plot point will come back later, actually, the whole lizard bones. Bird bones, if you want to go by Jurassic Park. I think it was a brachiosaur skeleton, by the way. You know, after what we saw in Batman a few weeks ago, Batman, during the Flugelheim Museum vandalism sequence, I feel let down that this damage is the worst it got. I think more movies should feature intentional rampant destruction in art galleries, while weirdos dance to a Prince song. Oh, and ironically, Ann Miller really did knock over this dinosaur prop during one of the takes. Her dress hit it after she got too close with her exuberant dance moves, so she clipped it similarly to the way Munshin does in the storyline, and that dino spill cost Kelly and Donen some filming time. When you hear how Kelly handled some of the problems during Singin In The Rain 3 years later, I have to assume he blasted Ann Miller something awful over that, although I didn't read that he did. It's high time for another montage as we get out of there, and then the guys, Hildy and Claire, drive all over the place, trying to find Miss Turnstiles. There's only one woman in New York City who's worthy of Gabe's affections, and I guess she's expected to return them. It's 1:30 p.m. now, and they still haven't found Poison Ivy, so they decide to split up and increase their odds. Claire and Ozzy are one team, Gabe is on his own, while Chip and Hildy take the cab. The chipper wants to see some sights, then he'll worry about finding Ivy, but the horny cabbie just wants to take him home. What did I say about fast women? She's not fast. She's Danica Patrick, or whoever the commensurate woman race car driver is in 2024. Sinatra and Betty Garrett also sing a song about him wanting to drive around the city, contrasted with her belting back, "My place, my place!" She clearly won this battle of wills because they do end up at her place, and they're kissing not 15 seconds after they close the door. Trouble is, her sick roommate Lucy is home, and she harshes their lusty mellow simply by being there, and by being quite annoying. Alice Pierce plays Lucy Schmealer. I believe she's the only person from the Broadway cast who's actually in the movie. Meantime, Gabe ends up at a dance studio, and what do you know? That's where Ivy is. Big cities. I hear if you want it bad enough, you can find anybody, anywhere. We talked about this when we covered White Christmas several years ago, but Vera-Ellen's waistline is monumentally tiny in this scene. I don't think she ever ate solid food. Maybe when she was 9 years old, but not when she was 28, which is what she was during filming. Gabe tries to charm Ivy, but he has uncouth nerve, and she's appalled at the mere suggestion they go on a date. "But the man's on a clock, lady." He confesses he's been trying for hours to find her, and he just honestly wanted to meet her and spend time with what he thinks is a big-time New Yorker. Although she isn't that, we'll find out towards the end of the movie that she's actually a small-towner from Indiana, just like he is. Gaby Baby sings Main Street to the star of the subway, and she, naturally, knows all the moves, which I won't take great issue with, since she's a dancer. She's not a wacky cab driver or a cold-blooded scientist. And since this is a Gene Kelly musical, this ditty involves plenty of tap dancing. You might not have heard, but all sailors are issued tap shoes when they go on shore leave. He asks her out again, more humbly this time, and now she's into it. They'll meet at 8:30, but where? Bev and I enjoyed that. For once, a movie acknowledges that they didn't say where they would meet later that night. He rushes back, because that happens all the time, right? Let's meet at 7:30, 8:30, whatever. But where? Unless it's back at the dance studio, I guess, which they didn't say. So he rushes back after he almost left to ask that exact question. This film came out before An Affair to Remember, and of course long before Sleepless in Seattle, but they picked the Empire State Building, just like those movies did. Of course, King Kong got there before any of them did. There's a question for you. If you like romantic movies, which do you find to be the most romantic? On the Town, An Affair to Remember, Sleepless in Seattle, or King Kong? I might go with the monkey movie. Okay, I wouldn't, but it's the best film of all of those. And I think the last three are all on the AFI's Passions list. On the Town's not, but An Affair to Remember, Sleepless in Seattle, King Kong, I think all three are. The next scene finds Chip and Hildy up on the roof of the building, in fact, the Empire State Building. He's using one of those dime telescopes to see whatever he can, but she just wants him to look at her. He does confess that she's the prettiest cab driver he's ever seen. Well, he's seen one cab driver all day, and he lives on a boat with nothing but men, so the odds were good she would be. Chip proves just how much he does like being around her, though, when he sings, "You're awful nice to be with." I guess the Chipmeister fell hard, and he fell fast. Of course, she was into him literally at first sight, so I guess he's hours late to the heart party. This is a nice little number, though. Most of the songs in this movie are at least pretty good. Ozzy and Claire show up on the roof after the You're Awful number is over, then so does Gaby. What were Ozzy and Claire up to all day? She measured his head earlier. Was she measuring his feet and making projections about measurements of other body parts based on those feet? Gabe is excited to tell the gang that he has a date with Ivy that night, just as some cops and the guy who runs that museum show up. They're looking for the guy who wrecked the dinosaur statue, but in a terrifying twist, and I do mean terrifying, Chip and Gabe hide Ozzy by hanging him over the edge of the building. They each have a hand and they BS the cops enough to make them leave. And somehow Ozzy doesn't plummet to his Joker-esque death, turning on his laugh machine as he's falling. But all is well. I have to admit that even though this sequence should be horrifying and the whole thing was a little dumb, I did laugh at a few of the shots when Ozzy's hanging there. Ivy shows up and the three couples sing On the Town together. The guys are, of course, in white, but I like how the ladies are in contrasting colors that really stand out. Yellow, pink, green. Hildy looks fairly snazzy in yellow, Claire's in the pink dress, and Vera-Ellen looks as good as she does in the entire film wearing this green outfit. But wait, there's more songs. The guys have the Shore Leave Blues and sing about that, when what they should be doing is to go out and fill their bellies with food and drink, or fill their arms with their lovely dates. And they will do that, but guys, the clock is ticking. They do finally get down to street level, although they keep telling us through the power of song that they're going on the town. They'd rather talk about it than do it. Gabe tries to get them all into a busy club, except the maitre d' doesn't recognize Miss Turnstiles as one of those "we have to find a table for her" type stars, so they have no clout. Gaby, of course, still thinks she's a big deal, but nope. Luckily enough, another maitre d' accepts a bribe from Claire and Hildy and does let them all in. He even makes a fuss over Ivy along the way because the other two dames paid him to. I love saying dames with these old movies. After some musing about the fancy cocktails they could order, they all just get beer. I like Hildy's line when she gets her stein, which is more head than beer. Just what I wanted, a beer full of glass. The other two couples hit the dance floor while Gabe and Ivy enjoy some champagne sent over by the bribed maitre d'. Our lovebirds bond some more, ending up smooching. Ooh. But they only get to lock their lips for about 2 seconds before the other four come back to enjoy the free champagne. The six-pack toast to this adventure and them finding each other. Gaby ends up stumbling across some shipmates. Another shipmate! Yes, the more the merrier! And brags to them that he found the most famous girl in New York, but she's gone when he brings the guys over to his table to meet her. She took off, see, because her dance boss demanded earlier that Ivy show up for a gig at 11:30 that night. Gabe doesn't take it too hard that Ivy bailed and the five of them end up at another club. Hildy takes pity on the G-man and she recruits her roommate Lucy to be his date for the rest of the night. If only the most handsome man in the movie could have met someone else on his own. The guys, Kelly and Sinatra at least, were already far better looking than their dates, but Alice Pierce here is just not up to snuff. I know that's the gag, that Lucy is already nerdy and sick and not in Gabe's league, but none of the women are really on par with the two movie stars in this anyway. Somehow, these two other seamen we just talked about, seamen, end up at the same club again, and they finally meet this woman Gabe had said was the one, even though that was another the one. As Bev said at this point, this poor actress, it's so insulting to her. It's like how Steve Buscemi was called funny looking in the Fargo screenplay. I don't know, just funny looking. And the Coens intended the part for him. They didn't want him to wear elaborate makeup or change his appearance. Just be yourself, Mr. Funny Looking. Thanks, guys. The others see Gaby sitting at the bar with a hangdog expression, so they try to pick him up with a song called You Can Count on Me. I like when there's a lyric about On land sea foam, which is a line in the song the three guys sing in Jaws, the night they're all drunk down the galley. The Jaws song was called Show Me the Way to Go Home, right? I guess it's a real song from before that they didn't make up for Jaws. I guess this is a different tune about land or sea or foam. Foam. Anyway, they end the number by collapsing a table and laughing about it. Who's going to pay for that? But then Gabe takes Lucy home and apologizes for being a Donnie Downer of a date. She wants him to come up for a minute because the men in this movie are irresistible to the women in this movie, but he's sweet in how he says his heart is for another, which is true, but he also really has no interest in making the time with Lucy. Of course, since he should really believe that he'll never see Ivy again, you'd think he might just settle here, rather than get no good lovin' at all during his one day in New York. Bev speculated that Gene Kelly has it in his contract that he gets a fancy dance sequence in every movie that will take place right before the last act begins, and here we are again. They came later, but fancy dances happened in An American in Paris and Singin' in the Rain. Geez, we've already had one or two fancy dances in this movie, but this sequence has Gino dancing with two guys who aren't Sinatra and Munshin, and two women who aren't Miller and Garrett. They used these other four dancers because they could tap and the four actors could not. Although Vera-Ellen is part of the fantasy during the part where she and Kelly find themselves back in the dance studio. They wordlessly replay the movie up until now in a couple of minutes of soft shoeing. It's well done and all, but it feels so unnecessary. Gene Kelly gets to show off, which is nice, but it's not like there was a lack of singing and dancing in the rest of the film and they had to make up for it here. Plus he's mooning for Ivy, but we already know he's gaga about her. Bev wasn't impressed with this time waster all that much either, although she does like this kind of stuff, and that's a quote. Me, not so like. That gotta dance, gotta dance, gotta dance. That whole sequence before the last act in Singin' In The Rain is easily the worst part of the movie. And don't tell anybody, but the last time I watched Singin' In The Rain, I was on a bit of a clock and I skipped over that part. Ooh, wrong to do that to a classic movie, but I did. Chip draws sad sack Gabe into the Shanghai Club with talk of loving him, and this is the real love story in this movie, by the way. But they somehow stumble across Ivy's dance boss, who reveals that Ivy went to Coney Island to work that night. And even though it's nearly the morning and the cops and that museum guy are still out looking for Ozzy, just fix the statue and move on, guy. Hildy piles everybody in her cab and leads them on a big chase. She was supposed to return that car something like 18 hours ago. She's going to be so freaking fired. Also, nutshell, I have a very brief one, and I've used the word several times already, so, on the town, in a nutshell, somehow. This is a movie full of fantastic coincidences and dumb luck. Anyway, Hildy is a skillful and I guess aspiring race car driver, so she ditches the cops and heads for Coney Island. Once they get there, somehow, it takes them all of 4 seconds for Gabe to find Ivy working as a cooch dancer. Cooch. C-O-O-C-H. I looked it up, and I guess cooch refers to erotic dancing or burlesque. So it's not the most classy thing one can do. Anyway, Ivy's ashamed of what she does to make money, and that's why she ran out on him. But he doesn't care. He's just happy to see her again. And through her tears, she finally reveals that she and Gabe share a hometown. Vital information. And Gabe really had to have another reason to fall in love with her, I guess, too. Would it have made her less likable to Gabe or to the audience if Ivy Smith really was a native New Yorker, not an import from the Midwest? Our 3 guys end up dressed as lady dancers, which is handy because the cops find them at the fair, only they don't recognize them when they're dressed like this. Those 3 guys look and sound nothing like women, but they draw a crowd of legitimately impressed cops. Back away, pigs. These fellas is spoken for. Our boys end up locked in the back of a shore patrol van, and the cops dust their hands and say, "That's that. Justice is served." A tourist accidentally broke something in a museum, which might have been fixed by now if the museum guy had just focused on that instead of the expensive pursuit across the city. But justice. And I guess our guys were going back to the ship one way or another. They weren't going to try to skip out and going back there at 6 o'clock in the morning anyway. Hildy, Claire, and Ivy stick up for their guys to not get into trouble with their commanding officer. The ladies win over the crowd, including the cops. Even though Ivy's body show was supposed to be a performance for a paying crowd, everybody just stops and watches this drama unfold instead. Not that the cab driver and the anthropologist aren't enthusiastic and convincing when they stick up for the objects of their amorous affections. In any case, the cops are moved by all this and they decide that all the charges they might have laid against the sailors should be dropped. It's 5:15 after all. Maybe everybody is just exhausted. We're back on the docks just before 6 a.m., and that same dock worker we saw at the beginning is heading to work, and here he is singing again. The ladies show up just as 24 hours is up for the guys. They have to get on the boat ASAP, so they all snag one last second kiss, then they board. Although the boat isn't going anywhere just yet because the next round of guys disembark. 3 other guys sing, "New York, New York, it's a wonderful town." Then the camera pans up to show the skyline as Gabe, Chip, and Ozzy wave to the 3 women, and that's that. Now Chip and Gabe can get below decks and return to what they both want to do anyway, spend romantic time with each other. They're in love. This New York thing was just a dalliance. Let's get it on. Oh, Gaby. So, the cast. Gene Kelly has only been in 2 other movies that we've previously reviewed, and those were An American in Paris and Singin' in the Rain. We covered them back in early 2014, so it's been a decade plus since old Gene was given some proper airtime in this channel. Oh, he also does some singing in A Clockwork Orange. They use his song in that movie, which he didn't like. He also made Anchors Away and Take Me Out to the Ball Game, both of which co-starred Sinatra. Gino played it serious in Inherit the Wind in 1960. I saw that again a year or so ago. It's a good movie, and it's not like Gene isn't at least decent in it, but it's just not up his alley to play a reporter in a courtroom drama. It feels wrong. I'm sure Bev and I talked about how Jeannie made Debbie Reynolds cry when they were making Singin' in the Rain because her dancing wasn't cutting enough mustard for him, so I assume he was always pretty demanding in general. I didn't read about that in stories about this movie, but a bully doesn't usually start getting short-tempered later in life. Anyway, whatever he was like behind the scenes, his on-screen characters were always pretty wholesome, and even though he never had a lot of range, he played likable very well. And of course, the man was a wonderful singer and dancer, one of the greatest of all time. He was even 15th on AFI's Top 50 Stars, although Sinatra didn't make that list. Of course, while he was given an honorary award in 1952, Gene Kelly never won a competitive Oscar the way Frank Sinatra did, when he took home the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for From Here to Eternity 4 years after this flick came out. Frank was also dynamite in the paranoid thriller The Manchurian Candidate. We covered both of those back in our AFI days. Sinatra not only made those other musicals with Kelly earlier in this decade, and sometimes with these other actors too, but he made Guys and Dolls with Brando in the mid-50s. Frankie was good in From Here to Eternity and all those musicals, sure, but he's terrific in things like Suddenly, The Man with the Golden Arm, and of course, The Manchurian Candidate. The more serious his role was, I'd say the better he was. I know From Here to Eternity was a serious movie, but he's the, I don't know about comic relief, but the goofball. When he got serious, especially in the later 50s and the 60s, great stuff, very good actor, maybe a great actor. Betty Garrett got her start in Hollywood only the year before On the Town hit theaters, and the same year as this she was in another well-known musical, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, which starred all three of the guys in this movie. But almost everything else Betty G was ever in was a TV series. She was in a few episodes of All in the Family, and did a lot of episodes of Laverne and Shirley. Shamil, Schlemazel, Haas and Pfeffer Incorporated, diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle. Ann Miller was in a flick I reviewed not too long ago during Oscar month in March. That was in You Can't Take It With You, where she was a teenager who couldn't stop dancing. She had to dance, had to dance. Miller was best known as a song and dance woman who also starred in Easter Parade and Kiss Me Kate, but she ended her career in 2001 with a very non-musical performance in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. And that's actually what IMDb lists as her best known for, Mulholland Drive. For that matter, You Can't Take It With You is number 2 on there, and On the Town is number 3. Vera-Ellen was only in about 14 movies in total, one of which was White Christmas. We reviewed that several years ago. She had tremendous talent, but stopped making movies in 1957. The petite lady died of ovarian cancer in 1981 when she was just 60 years old. And I don't recall if we mentioned this during our White Christmas episode, but her name really was Vera-Ellen. It wasn't hyphenated. That's a showbiz thing. She was Vera Ellen Westmeyer, R-O-H-E, so Roe or Rohi. Jules Munshin had been in Easter Parade and Take Me Out to the Ball Game before this, and Silk Stockings after it. Munshin didn't even get as long on this earth as Vera-Ellen did. He died when he was just 54. He was only 3 days away from his 55th birthday, in fact, when a heart attack said, "Jules, meet the Grim Reaper." That's pretty dark for this movie. This movie's nothing but light. Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly split directing duties on this one, just as they would on the brilliant Singing in the Rain. I keep on saying singing, don't I? Singin' in the Rain, a few years later. This was the directorial debut for both of them. Donen did several other musicals like Royal Wedding and Funny Face with Fred Astaire. Stan the Man also worked the bullhorn on 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, Damn Yankees, Charade, and 2 for the Road. He worked with Audrey Hepburn at least 3 times because she was in those last 2, and also Funny Face. Donen was nominated for 5 Directors Guild Awards during his career and was given an honorary Oscar in 1998, but was never up for a competitive Academy Award. Gene Kelly only had 1 competitive Oscar nom, which was for Best Actor in Anchors Away. He didn't direct as often as Donen did, but he made It's Always Fair Weather, where he again shared directing duties with Donen, and later on made Hello Dolly with Barbra Streisand. That was on his own. Musical and rom-com specialists, Adolph Green and Betty Comden wrote the script, based on their 1944 musical play. This was based on an idea by Jerome Robbins, who would share an Oscar for directing one of the most famous musicals of all time, West Side Story, which he made with Robert Wise 12 years later. Arthur Freed was the producer, as he was on An American in Paris and Singin' in the Rain. Freed was also an associate producer on The Wizard of Oz 10 years before this. Artie was apparently thrilled with what Kelly and Donen had shot while they were making this flick, and told them so after he saw some dailies. A supportive producer is quick to tell his people that they're doing well. Imagine that. Studio head Louis B. Mayer wasn't quite so helpful, or gleeful, or supportive, but I don't think you could ever describe Lou that way anyway. He made them come up with quite a few different songs because he didn't really like the stage musical and wished he hadn't ponied up dough to get it in the first place. He couldn't have complained about a lack of songs between the stage ones and the new ones. These songs aren't as good as the ones in Singin' in the Rain, but I like most of them just fine. We've been reviewing quite a few black and white films lately, but this is glossy Technicolor shot by Harold Rawson. Hal shot Singin' in the Rain and The Wizard of Oz 2, but also Mogambo, which I reviewed just a few months ago. The Prince is 4x3, and Bev and I watched it on our PVR after I recorded it off TCM. It looked pretty good, and the film is fun. It's not deep at all, and it's even a little bit dumb, but we had a good time watching and mocking it. I'm not a musical guy in general. I've probably said that a lot over the years. Although this isn't Les Miserables, which I found to be one of the most insufferable musicals ever made. On the Town is light and glossy, and it's so easy to make fun of. Plus, it's horny. You didn't get that with a lot of old Hollywood rom-coms, especially when it's women doing the horn dogging. Garrett was a little much, but it's nice that for once, women are the ones who clearly want more than just to sit and talk. They want to touch some flesh, baby. So that was how I saw On the Town. My next podcasting assignment will be on Friday when I review our first ever Sophia Loren joint. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yep, going to get every one of the actors on that AFI Top 50 list in once I've done that movie. Then on Monday, well, Bev will be back. She's watched a few of the flicks with me lately, but she's ready to watch one and also climb the stairs to record some thoughts about it. So on Monday, May 20th, she and I will tackle another Alfred Hitchcock thriller. We've done a lot of them. This time it's Ray Milland and Grace Kelly in Dial M for Murder. Contact us. Our email is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Our Twix handles are @MovieFiend51 and @BevEllisEllis. She goes with that same @ on Threads. We make sure that our podcasts go up on YouTube every week too, or sometimes twice a week, Mondays and Fridays. It usually takes me a few hours, but before the day gets too old, you can find our podcast in tube form. The destination is @HYESEllis in your browser, so make that a bookmark, or just click over to YouTube and type Have You Ever Seen into the search bar dealy. However you do it, whether it be on the app or on the tube, rate us, review us, subscribe to us, like us. You know what people usually ask for when they're desperate for affirmation? Well, do it for us too. We would appreciate it. And look up Sparkplug Coffee online too. They offer our listeners a 20% discount. You just have to use our HYES promo code. One time, 20% discount. So try sparkplug.coffee/HYES. All right then, that'll do it. Thanks for checking us out today, or checking me out. Join me Friday for Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, and then Monday when Mrs. Ellis returns to jaw with me about Dial M for Murder. Meantime, I'm going to go to one of my favorite cities in the world and see something like 12 sites that are scattered all over the city in about 3 hours. Just like these guys do. Right, like I can afford to go to New York. Now that's a fantasy. And cut.